20 years ago, on January 14th, 2006, Scarlett Johansson hosted SNL for the first time with music from Death Cab for Cutie. And on this January 14th, 2026, John Schneider and Sammy K are here to break it all down. Sammy, how are you?
John, I'm doing well. It's been a nice break these past couple weeks, just enjoying the holiday season, enjoying the new year, taking a bit of a break from SNL, but excited to dive back into all things SNL with this episode, and as this new run of shows is ahead of us.
Yeah, very excited in modern times to talk about what's coming up here in January. But of course, it's been a while since we've been here for 20 years later. And really, since December 17th, that Jack Black, Neil Young episode, that was a big one. And of course, 20 years ago, during that break, all the hype was building for the Lonely Island and everything we talked about from Lazy Sunday. So now we got to feel the length of time that it took for SNL to finally come back and how excited everyone was since then.
Yeah, no, it's funny to think about how much can change, overnight for Andy Samberg, and here in this episode, I feel like we start to see a little bit of the seed of that kind of post Lazy Sunday hype that he got. Obviously, not in the digital short itself, but he's got some moments in this episode that I think are pretty noteworthy.
Yeah, excited to dive into it. Of course, we are here each and every 20 years later to the date of all the season 31 episodes, and that's something we've been doing all season long. If you are watching us on our channel, we have unlocked this episode for not just the patrons, but for everybody to check out what's going on with Sammy and I and revisiting this old recap. We thought it would be fun to start off the new year, and as someone who ends up hosting a lot more than just one Scarlett Johansson, so there's some familiarity here, and it's fun to revisit her first time at SNL. So if you do enjoy this episode, you are totally welcome to subscribe to our Patreon, patreon.com/the SNL Network, where we have links to all of the episodes we have covered so far, and we will have all of the episodes coming up for the rest of the season for season 31. Or if you are a YouTube only person, you're not really so into Patreon, even though there's some other perks over there, we do have a YouTube membership tier where you can sign up on our YouTube channel to see these podcasts as well. We have those available for all of you. So Sammy, we aren't fully behind the paywall today, but it's exciting still to be here to talk about season 31.
Yeah, and a big reason people should subscribe to the Patreon is, we got our unfiltered thoughts. Here we're gonna not have as many hot takes as usual, but still give you, how we felt about these episodes. Obviously kidding. I'm going to totally unload on this one, but there's a lot of positive things to say about this. So I'm pretty happy that we can share this with everybody. Another sort of underrated thing about the Patreon is you get to be a part of the Discord community as well. Talk about SNL with a bunch of, other super fans. So, definitely, check it out.
Yeah, we had a great patron feedback show this past Monday, which was combined with our midseason by the numbers show, where we had a lot of patrons call in to talk about cast members from season 51. So yeah, a lot of things happening here at the SNN. And of course, we'll be back in modern times with full coverage of the next episode of season 51. But let's take our minds and bodies and go all the way back 20 years to where we were back in January of 2006 and talk about Scarlett Johansson. And it is a little bit of like this time displacement thing that's hard to do with Scarlett, because it seems that she is so much a part of modern day SNL. The fact that she just hosted the season finale of last season, of course, her relationship with Colin Jost, who is a first-year writer that we've spoken about this season, and we assume that this is the first time that Colin Jost and Scarlett Johansson met each other. They weren't dating for a long time afterwards, but they met each other during this episode that we get to talk about here tonight. But Sammy, can you place yourself 20 years ago, and what do you remember about Scarlett Johansson and her coming in to host for the first time?
Sure. I mean, funny enough, at this time, probably the first thing I ever saw Scarlett Johansson in was she was a voice in the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. I believe she played King Triton's daughter. And obviously at this time, I'm a kid, so SpongeBob is a big deal for me. I feel like they also at that time on Nickelodeon they would do a thing where they would show, for advertising the film, they would show like, here's the cartoon actor and here's the actor voicing them in the booth. So that's probably the first time I really saw her. in anything. She was somebody who obviously has been acting almost her entire life. She was a child star, didn't really watch any of those films. And then, shortly before this, her probably her big breakout moment as a star is in the 2003 film Lost in Translation, another SNL connection there with Bill Murray, which got a lot of Oscar buzz at the time. So this is still the point in her career where she is transitioning from being somebody who is known as a child star to being somebody that's really taken seriously. At this point, she also, I think, a big reason why she was hosting is because she had been nominated for a Golden Globe for the film Match Point, and so she's really starting to elevate her status. So very interesting to see her come into the SNL sphere as somebody who's trying to maybe take themselves more seriously as an actor, but it turns out they can actually do comedy pretty well as well.
Yeah, I had a weird thing with Scarlett where we were sort of like ships in the night in a sense, where I like had heard of her back then, but I didn't really watch any of her projects. And I don't know what it was. I always have this because I've gone through the entire series chronologically twice now, and then now I'm doing this series with you, where like I get to this episode and the one we're going to talk about next week, and there's something about them where I just don't think I watched them live. I know I had like been in and out throughout the fall, and definitely remember the Jack Black episode being majorly impactful. But I think for whatever reason in January of '06, like I don't know what was going on, and I just missed these episodes, so I didn't remember some of the things that I was seeing. But overall, it is such an exciting debut, especially knowing what's to come about Scarlett being so ingrained in part of the family at Saturday Night Live. I think she's a really good host of the show. I think that sometimes, she probably doesn't get the credit for elevating material that I think some of the other great hosts who have hosted as many times as her have. But I think she fits in so well in this first episode. She is so much more confident than the typical 21-year-old coming in to host the show. It really felt like a natural fit, and that's probably why we've seen her so many times since then. So let me head to the press release that SNL had put out at the time. January 14th features Scarlett Johansson as host. With an already impressive decade of work under her belt at a young age, Johansson hosts SNL for the first time as she receives rave reviews for her work in Woody Allen's acclaimed new film Match Point. Do you remember Match Point?
Yeah, so that was the movie I just mentioned. She was nominated for a Globe. Yeah,
Got it. Okay.
haven't seen the film. Haven't seen the film.
Yes. So for which she was nominated for her fourth consecutive Golden Globe Award in 3 years. So she's going to talk about the Globes a bit in the monologue. Johansson attained worldwide recognition at 14 in Robert Redford's The Horse Whisperer, and has transitioned from child star to leading lady in such varied and praised fare as Ghost World, The Coen Brothers, The Man Who Wasn't There opposite Billy Bob Thornton, Love Song for Bobby Long with John Travolta, In Good Company, and her BAFTA award-winning performance opposite SNL alum Bill Murray in Sofia Coppola's Lost in Translation. She will next be seen in Brian De Palma's The Black Dahlia, Allen's next feature Scoop, as well as the upcoming big screen adaptation of the best-selling The Nanny Diaries. So a lot of projects here for Scarlett Johansson, and we will definitely get into how she does throughout the entire episode. But first, we're going to head over to our cold open, which is probably the most unique cold open in the history of the show, maybe, where we get a portion of a Saturday TV Funhouse commercial dropped into the cold open, which features a cartoon with the 700 gang talking about divine retribution and how it explains everything about a couple minutes, and then goes to a Live from New York. Something you don't really see. I know that there was, I think season 7, they did no Live from New York, so no real cold opens, and sort of did this like, quick card on screen, and then the cast ran out. Like there was been some weird things back then, but for like modern SNL, this is a weird one. Sammy, would love to know your thoughts, and then we'll sort of get into the explanation of what we saw here.
Yeah, I agree. This was very bizarre. To me, just going back to the narrative of Robert Smigel sees the Lonely Island coming up, doing these digital shorts and being like, I gotta get to work here. And so I found this to be very bizarre that not only that it's in the cold open, but then we sort of return to this sort of concept of being like very focused on Christian media, later in the episode with the Darwin TV Funhouse sketch. And then I feel like we hit a lot of these topics in Weekend Update as well. So I know, there are some times where a huge news story comes out and we see it in the cold open and we see it in Weekend Update. But this was a place or a point where, I mean, I didn't think the TV Funhouse was that strong. I think the one we get later on is way better. And I'm not sure if sort of the background behind like why this happened or if something was cut, but I would be so curious to hear how we ended up with this opening up the show, because I don't think it's a strong opening.
So first, let me say that the Darwin TV Funhouse, which we'll talk about in a little bit, was where this cold open took place. Like, it was as a part of it. So they just pulled it out at some point. So when we talk about the Darwin one, I'll explain where they took that out. But what happened here is they had a hardball cold open, a live one, and for some reason it was cut. We've asked Smigel. He's talked about it on Mark Malkoff's podcast, Inside Late Night, and he talked about it a little bit in the Live from New York book, but he doesn't seem to remember why that never came together. I hate to theorize too much, but I'll just put out the fact that like Daryl has had episodes in the past that he's had to miss or back out of before. That was my first thought of like maybe Daryl just couldn't do the episode. He's come on our podcast before and talked about some of the issues he had throughout his time at the show, so it's not like a big secret. So that was my first thought of like, well, maybe it was too late. Like Daryl couldn't do the episode and they didn't have a cold open, so they just put this together. But then Smigel told a story on Malkoff's podcast that sort of, contradicts that idea, because he says that Daryl was available for something. So here, let me get into, I sort of pulled the transcript from this, so I'll read this, and definitely go check out Inside Late Night if you want to go listen to this episode. Higgins said, "Why not just take that out of Smigel's piece and make it a cold open," in reference to the Pat Robertson portion. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have to re-edit it and give him a Live from New York, it's Saturday night kind of thing. So this is Smigel talking. So I had to run back to, and again, go to Sony Studios, which is where we always mix the show and edit it. And so I was on it was on 54th and 10th, and it's Saturday night, and there's always traffic. So I bolted down there, got it done, re-edited it. I had to re-edit both cartoons, got it done by about 11 o'clock, and as the sound is being laid down, something's wrong. Something crashes. I still don't know exactly what happened, but there was no sound, and we had to redo it again, and now I'm freaking out. And I had to run over there. Literally at 11:25, I get to SNL, and Ken Among, the supervising producer of the show, on his own, because he knew I was up against it, had actually created his own version. So he had them chop up a version at the same time as Smigel's doing this, and for someone to say Live from New York, it's Saturday night live. So what was going to happen is that Smigel said that Daryl Hammond was in the booth ready to say Live from New York over the commercial. So if Daryl's there ready to do that, that sort of like contradicts my thinking. So I get there finally, and he says, "I'm sorry, I've got no time to ingest your video," but thank God that Ken had done that. So Smigel runs to the booth because he had done the Pat Robertson voice in the commercial. And in order to make it consistent, it made more sense for Smigel to say Live from New York. So he ran into the booth. Daryl takes his headphones off, hands them to Smigel, and halfway through the sketch, he does say it live from New York at Saturday night for the first time in Smigel's life, which is, he talks about how it's not typical for writers to get to do that, even though he was a cast member for a season or two. But it was a horrendously panicked moment that we just got through by the skin of our teeth. And as the sketch ended, I walked out of the booth. I saw Lauren. I just shook my head. I said, "I'm sorry that I caused you all that stress because the whole thing crashed at 11 and caused a disaster. But maybe if I was a little less picky, I could have done it more in like the 10:30 range." Anyways, so Smigel sort of thinking about this whole thing. So clearly it was like one of the wildest scenes that you would get of like, how are they going to start the show? What's going to happen? There's still a lot we don't know, but I find this endlessly fascinating, Sammy.
Thank you for that context, because it definitely makes me, I guess, appreciate the effort clearly that was put in to get something on. I am just still curious about the choice. I think it's interesting that we're still being experimental with SNL. I think that's always a good thing. But yeah, I don't know. I think it ultimately for me didn't work super well. But props to Robert Smigel for getting it together. And I think it's cool that in the history of the show, he's able to say it Live from New York at least once. So I think that alone makes this all sort of worth it.
Yeah, and I want to just say, like, I really tried to figure out this mystery. If Smigel doesn't know, I don't really know. Like, Ken Among, I think, went back to the show this season in season 51. So I don't know how reachable he is right now, but like, I would love to speak to someone who could figure this out. Because the 20-year anniversary of this like crazy cold open was coming up, I actually pitched to Late Nighter to do an article on this in the hopes that we could solve this mystery. And I know one of the guys over there emailed Smigel, and Smigel just responded like, I really don't know what the reason was that the cold open doesn't work out. So like, I do trust that he's saying what he has to say, but clearly there is there's more mystery here. And as any of our listeners know, I love to solve histories and mysteries of Saturday Night Live, and hopefully we'll get that answer one day for you, and then maybe put an addendum to this podcast as we go through. But let's move on to our monologue that we have here from Scarlett, who does come out. And the crux of this monologue, which is put together by Seth, James Anderson, and Steve Higgins, is that Amy's going to come and join Scarlett. They're both wearing the same dress, and they're going to sing "Isn't It Wonderful Being a Star" as they go back and forth, where, you know, Scarlett's talking about the fact that she's going to go to the Golden Globes and all the things that she's accomplished, and Amy has accomplished a little bit less, and it's a little bit of like two sisters battling it out with each other. But I thought this was a fun and nice monologue we had here, Sam.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially because Amy is the one in the position here sort of comparing herself to ScarJo, but Amy in her own right has had like a very impressive career for comedy, and the fact that she is, you know, one of the few cast members to star as a featured player and get that promotion in the middle of the season, whether that's a contractual thing or not, still very impressive. She already had such a big comedy career sort of going into the show with UCB. I like that from a meta perspective. It is still wild. I know Scarlett Johansson mentioned she's 21 hosting this episode. It always blows my mind when, you know, I find myself on their Wikipedia page and I see she's 41. Like, she is somebody who has just been around for so long, and obviously she started so young, so that explains it. But that still kind of blows my mind. But yeah, I thought this was cute. The sort of back and forth between Amy. I think there's some good lines in here. And I also thought it was sort of ironic with the whole bit about having the Golden Globes and Amy seeming like a little jealous about that, but she'll obviously eventually go on to not only host the Golden Globes, but you know, just a couple nights ago, winning the first ever Best Podcast Golden Globe. So again, 20 years later, looking back, very interesting to see. But yeah, no, I think overall, I think this is a cute singing monologue, and it was good to sort of see the back and forth between Amy and Scarlett Johansson sort of right off the bat.
That's such a fun 20 years later connection to just have that, you know, Amy actually winning that Golden Globe just a few days ago in real time. But yeah, they tend to do like sort of like sister bits every few years. I think they did like some Amy Adams, Kristen Wiig stuff like coming up. So it's not so unique or novel in what they're doing here, but I thought it was nice, and it does show off her talent. And like at 21 years old, like again, like a younger person, but has a lot of experience. You just want to know that she's fully capable of hosting the show, and she gives any viewer a lot of confidence in this monologue.
How old are you?
I am 21. How old are you?
About that.
So really solid stuff here. Then we're going to go to our third repeat of Taco Town. So we discussed that back at the beginning of the season. So we'll jump right over to the second edition of Deep House Dish. This is the James Anderson and John Lutz piece with Keenan anchoring alongside Rachel Dratch. The first time we saw this was in the Eva Longoria episode, and we're going to have different performers here, including Amy, who's going to be playing Kalisha Kang, singing about Googling him. We got Scarlett as Donna Smalls English, singing, you know, "Don't You Wish You Looked Like This," and describing her experience performing at Elton John's wedding. And then Chris Parnell as DJ Intro, talking about all of the samples and noises that a DJ would make. How did you feel about the second edition of Deep House Dish?
Yeah, I think I mentioned on that episode that I kind of forgot that this starts out as like a Keenan Dratch piece, and then we eventually move on to the T. Shane character with Andy Samberg, and that's how I really remember these sketches. But I found that the dynamic here between Keenan and Dratch was kind of figured out a little more. Like I kind of liked their banter. I felt like for some reason in that first iteration it didn't work for me, but I found that it worked a lot better here. And the highlight for me as far as the sort of performers that we get is Parnell. We get a little snippet of him rapping, which I think is great. The "I Want to Check This Mic Out" song.
I want to check this mic out! I want to check this mic out! No!
That's a banger. And I think ScarJo's song was pretty catchy as well. Kind of gave me like a Don't Ya Pussycat Dolls vibe. I'm not sure if in the timeline if that song has already come out or if that's a 2007 banger, but
I feel like that's a 2006.
Yeah,
like just off the top of my head.
we're in January 2006, so it could be early.
Yeah, I'm just taking a look now. That's that came out April 2005. So yeah.
Oh, okay. So that's definitely,
that sounds right.
Yeah, we're definitely doing a Pussycat Dolls thing here. So yeah, no, I think these sketches are fun and silly. I kind of like it in the spot, sort of at the top of the show, especially with a first time host, sort of getting them out for like a sort of a bit part, be kind of silly and kind of show that they can sort of hang here. And I thought Scarlett Johansson's sort of accent and performance and the way she's sort of going on and on about how she performed at Elton John's wedding, and she did it because she was like a caterer and she ripped her catering outfit on and just like grabbed the mic and went on stage. I think there's a lot of good stuff here that already, even though I'm a fan of these sketches, I found this to be a step up from the first one that we got earlier in the season.
So tangent, just to say that Pussycat Dolls album was so good. Just taking a look at the tracks on there. But yeah, no, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think that the sketch was tighter than the first one. The only thing I do disagree about is that I think that the Keenan-Dratch dynamic was better in the first one. Just because I felt like it was a natural buildup to his frustration with her, where you go into that first sketch and he's not like already saying that she's so boring. And I'm a big Deep House-ish defender, but I think that Keenan just like almost was, maybe it was the way it was played out or the lines. I'm still trying to figure that out, but there was something in the fact that like it felt like he was ready to go at her the second she said anything. And I think that there's like a little bit more grace that was given in that first sketch. I find any ooh-wee that we get from Keenan in this one does make me laugh, especially as we get later in the sketch. You're going to have Chris Parnell talking about like horse tranquilizer addiction, and then we'll get a response from Drash, which will lead to the final tiara, which I think all works. But it's those first few that I think were like a little bit not the best setup for me, not given enough space to breathe, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting because just from my memory of that one, I found that sort of like the reaction that he was giving to her for what she was sort of doing like wasn't warranted and it felt sort of out of place, versus here I kind of liked the parts that Dratch got with her just being not a great co-host, and like going back to the Elton John wedding bit, she's like,
I bet that was a big wedding.
just like not being able to give any sort of good color commentary that Keenan's working for. So something about that specifically I liked a little bit more in this one, but I do see your point with it sort of going 0 to 60 right off the bat, and there's not as much build up to sort of him blowing up there.
She was doing a very funny thing though, where she's sitting there and she's like has her tongue sticking out and kind of just looks like not like, yeah, I don't want to, I'm trying to think the right word, but like she doesn't look all there.
A little off.
Yeah, a little off. Let's go to Smorgasbord, the next sketch, which is a Food Network show, or otherwise known as ESPN for Fatties. This is a Seth Meyers sketch that he's going to bring Andy into as well. But he's playing Helma Olsen opposite of Scarlett, who's playing Sigrid Helgason. And they're basically friends who have a pact to get married if Scarlett's husband dies. And we can see Bill Hader as the husband in bed. And while they're preparing the pickled herring in this sketch, they're talking about their bad timing and mislove connection, that the husband won't die and that they can't actually tell each other how much they love each other. And of course, we will get a side commercial with Andy as the Swedish chef at one point. How did you feel about the Smorgasbord sketch?
Yeah, I love this sketch. I feel like at this point in Seth's career, when he sort of gets the room to do sort of his thing in an episode, it always sort of hits my funny bone. And I think that sort of explains or harkens back to a lot of the things from, the era of SNL when he's a head writer, even when he's not in front of the camera, like that type of humor. I really enjoy. And seeing him sort of anchor this with Scarlett Johansson was great. His accent work here is so silly. He's got some line about how
The doctors say it is a miracle that he is alive, but to me the only miracle is that I have not taken my own life during the interminable wait.
so he can have his chance with Scarlett Johansson. There's so many little touches from a production standpoint that I think adds to this overall sort of atmosphere of like a Swedish cooking show. There's like this sound of like the wind rustling in the background, sort of in between segments. And I think it's funny how they are showing how to make the pickled herring, and it's just like you just put it in the pickle jar, that's it. And of course, I believe this is the first appearance of the Swedish Chef impression from Andy. So obviously someone who's not known as an impressionist, but I always love to see this. I think it's great that Seth, again, going back to earlier, how this is in a post-Lazy Sunday world, is just sort of giving him this opportunity to just sort of kill with this one cutaway here, and that totally fits the vibe of the sketch. So I really enjoyed this one.
I enjoyed it too. I think that Seth, maybe had a quieter first half than he wanted to. He does talk about this a lot, about how like these new guys came on and just crushed it and sort of took everything away from him. I think he has episodes where he pops. It's not consistent episode to episode, where maybe if they, if he didn't have, Bill and Andy and Jason all there, that like he would have had more opportunities. But I think it sort of benefits him to have that space and focus more on writing, as he's involved in the monologue in this episode. He puts together this sketch, which is pretty good. And I think maybe this is sort of like a distant cousin of what we got in the Eva Longoria episode with the Helga Engelhart and her three living brothers, that, CD commercial about them singing together, of like this like European flavor to a sketch that Seth is providing here. But I think him working off of Scarlett, like they're a really good duo. It's very funny. There is this, I always love like the serious like tension that sometimes you can get in a sketch if you set everything up right. And I think that camera angle was very beautiful. The way that they had like Bill Hader lying in the bed, almost as if like it's supposed to be comedic, but the fact that he is sort of like watching over them, I think really works here. The Swedish Chef thing for me, like it's always funny seeing Andy doing that, but like it felt out of place. I think a little bit. It was like I get they went to commercial and it was like for the ringtone, and it was funny. It just felt like, I wonder if I would have loved this even more if they just continued to like double down, or if Seth really felt like the tone shift by going to something so comedic in the middle of a like serious comedic sketch worked.
Yeah, I sometimes don't enjoy when a TV show sketch kind of goes to commercial and then goes back. But here, for whatever reason, it worked for me. Maybe because it's sort of set up earlier in the sketch where there's sort of a reference made to the Swedish Chef impression, just saying how it's barely an accurate stereotype of Swedish people, and then turns out that they sponsored the episode because they sort of need the money to keep this show going. So I think that alone worked for me, and just as a fan of Andy, just happy early in his career just to see him get something like this on.
Yeah, and I also think that you alluded to it earlier, but the fact that he really popped over the holidays, and there's all these articles and magazines writing about him, you think like everyone wants to put Andy in their sketch, and he's going to be in a lot tonight, and that makes sense for Seth to contribute to. So I thought this was a really, really fun piece here. We're going to then go to our TV Funhouse, which is titled as Intellivision Darwin. So it's sort of like a Hanna-Barbera-esque show that you would have seen back in like the 60s, 70s with like a Scooby-Doo type of thing. Like it's drawn out that way. But here it's Darwin, who of course, has this, proposition that all species of life have descended from a common ancestor. Most people follow that now, the rule of science. But there's of course the debate between, science and religion, and the back and forth where we get to see Darwin operating in real life. And then we'll cut to other shows that are on the same network. So we get to see Bryo, the gay stem cell, and Celibots as well. And one of those shows was going to be Pat Robertson and the 700 Gang. That one apparently got the biggest laughs interest, and that's why they chose to pull it out as the cold open. But now we get this shorter version of this TV Funhouse here. So what did you think?
This is interesting with that context, that was sort of the one that played the best. I would be curious to see how the sketch plays sort of as it was originally intended with everything in there, because it's definitely that's a lot of TV Funhouse to get through here. I thought the concept of this, again, just going back to sort of what we saw in the cold open, just this sort of Christian propaganda cartoon was very funny. The theme song for Darwin, there's something where it goes, he always burns in hell. It's Darwin. Like I thought that was funny. And then just making him look like just like an absolute buffoon, like just one of those sort of like dopey characters when he's just trying to like, do science and catalog things. Like he has like a catchphrase almost. He's like, "Oh, I got to catalog it." Like that gave me a laugh. Then we go to these other sort of, I guess, commercials, or you're almost channel flipping, and I was like, "Oh wow!" Like there's a lot of sort of fuel in this tank as we continue to go through these different elements. And then for me, we go back to the Darwin, and I almost feel like I kind of wish we had just either kept going to sort of different things, or just sort of ended a little shorter. Like the fact that there's additional material here that was put in the cold open, there's just like a lot here. So I kind of feel like if this had just been sort of focused in a little more on just sort of the channel flipping, instead of going back to the Darwin, I think that would have worked a little bit better for me. But overall, I thought this was like a solid TV Funhouse, and clearly they had a lot of ideas here for this particular type of sketch that they wanted to do.
I'm completely with you. I think that the Darwin thing was cute, but I wouldn't have necessarily had as much time devoted to it as they had. I think that it's a funny idea to look at like this Christian religious like set of shows that take place on this channel, and I think they just leans so heavily into Darwin that the joke almost just like dies a little bit for me. Where cutting this up and putting the cold open with the Pat Robertson thing like separate, I think probably leads this to like focus more heavily on Darwin, which I think takes away from the concept that was the best here. I think that the Celobots thing was the funniest for me though. Just that sort of like Transformers-esque commercial where like as soon as a Celobot like seems like he's going to hook up with a girl, that then he transforms to like cover up his parts and things like that. There was a lot there that I think maybe was worth the more focus than the Darwin aspect.
Yeah, with these TV Funhouse sketches, like I do love it when they go to like that Hanna-Barbera Saturday morning cartoon feel. I think they do such a good job sort of capturing that and then placing whatever that sort of topical or political, vibe to it, for that particular week. So yeah, I just want to shout that out. I guess I'm always impressed.
It was really beautifully done.
Yeah. So that was cool that we got to see that in this one.
So we're going to get the debut next of a big character for Fred Armisen, who is playing Mike, who I don't think a lot of people know him as his character's name, but this is the You Gotta Get Yourself character, where he is there with his wife, Tony, played by Rachel Dratch, there to sell chandeliers. So we get Mike and Tony's Chandelier Galaxy as they are introducing where all of these chandeliers will look beautiful in your home. We then get to meet Scarlett Johansson's character, their daughter, playing Lexi, who very famously does the look at this one, look at that one, look at this one, look at that one. And that is the, something that she will do a few times throughout her hosting tenure. But this was great to get to see it, and seeing the initial version of this, of course, a sketch put together by Colin Jost.
It was meant to be, folks. I've always enjoyed these sketches. Obviously, we get the marbled columns one as well down the line, and I do truly think that Scarlett Johansson is, for me, like the highlight of these. Like I mean, Fred's obviously great, but look at this one, look at that one, look at this one. Like they found like the exact right amount of times to say it without it being sort of beating the joke, beating a dead horse with that joke. I found the repetition of that to be really good. I found every time we're sort of cutting to like a different scenario. We're seeing, you ain't eating a steak until you're eating it under a chandelier. Like there's all these little things here that I really enjoy. And I also like the sort of use of Dratch in the sketch. Like at some point, I know she sort of hits Fred, but I feel like she doesn't really have any dialogue in the sketch until right at the end when it's about to end. And we see, the sort of, chandelier store sort of, outside the store. And then it sort of pans back to Rachel Dratch. And I just something about her saying, "You got to get a chandelier" was really funny to me. So great deployment of Dratch there. So yeah, this is really great that we got to see this in ScarJo's first episode.
And it is the only time we'll see Dratch in one of these sketches, because every time they're going to do it moving forward, she's no longer in the cast. But this is partially how I knew I didn't see this episode the first time, because Marble Columns, the second time they do this, was one of the most quotable sketches between my friends and I. I think we still have said it like in recent years, like when we've been places and seen a marble column. But we didn't realize, I guess I didn't realize for a long time, the chandelier had come first, which probably isn't as funny as marble column. So we'll talk about that when we eventually get to that season and that episode. But still, this is really, really well done. And it's so cool because obviously Scarlett at the time didn't know this would be a recurring character, but I think you watch it and you see how well she's doing, because when she does the look at this one, look at that one, she actually gets an applause break, which I don't think was planned in the sketch, but it's like a really like unique thing for a new host to get this moment where the audience is actually just going to like interrupt a sketch for applause. And I just thought that was really cool. And overall, everyone like came together in a very funny way in this sketch. Love these.
Agreed.
And the only other thing I have to say is like, I'm surprised that they never brought this back after like Fred was no longer in the cast. Because I think that, you could have brought him into the building. He was always like around when he was working at Seth's show. Colin was still writing. Maybe Scarlett didn't want to do these anymore, but like, I think that these always hit.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you never say never. We could always get one when she hosts her 10th time down the line.
Yeah. So then we're going to jump over to a sketch that I think is one of my favorite sketches in the history of Saturday Night Live. I'm just going to put it out there. This is a morning talk show. I believe it takes place in the morning, but it's a talk show called Duluth Live, where we get two hosts, Amy and Jason Sudeikis, and they have decided to bring on a new band to sing their theme song. And it opens up on Will Forte as the lead singer next to Scarlett Johansson singing Fly High Duluth. And we get a lot of the cast as the band here, but it is a insane song, a sketch that goes on for about 7 minutes, and it is must-see television. Like, I cannot recommend enough. If you're going to walk away from like season 31, rewatching it, picking sketches to watch, this has to be one of them, because they're going to ramp up, and Forte is going to be at his most Forte here as he is singing and going nuts. I love this one. Do you feel as strongly as me, Sammy?
So, John, I've seen sketches from this episode before, but I don't think I'd ever seen the sketch.
Really?
Wow.
So
this was such a great surprise. I feel like now, after watching it, the Fly High Duluth as a sketch or a name is something I've come across, but I really don't think I've seen this, and I don't know if this is one of those sketches. I mean, obviously, it's an original song, but I don't know if it's has a home online or anything like that. But I've never come across this, and I thought this was incredible. A complete, just a slam dunk performance from Will Forte here. I thought this was one of the best things I ever have seen him do on the show. I love how sort of not the entire cast, but a huge chunk of the cast is sort of in the background as the band. I think Bill Hader is making these funny faces, playing the guitar. Obviously, Fred eventually gets like this insane drum solo, which feel like at this point in his SNL career, like we know Fred's sort of musical, but I mean, that level of talent is amazing. I love the way they sort of just go, they sort of run with this concept, they go with it, and they let it be this sort of maximum version of whatever the sketch could be. I'm glad this is sort of, we're getting the full picture. We're not getting sort of, this is something that was maybe put towards the end of the night because it's a weirder sketch, and we end up losing 2 minutes of it because they're running up against the clock. But yeah, the way that it just keeps going on, and Sudeikis and Amy are frustrated, and it's just going back and forth between them. And I really don't think it gets old. Like, I feel like there's a world where this is the type of thing that could go from like amusing and funny to like annoying, and like when will this end? But it is just so well done here. And just the content of the song itself, like where it goes from like sort of being on topic with this sort of morning show talk show taking place in Duluth, to going to the part where Forte is saying like, I could feel it way down in my loins, my loins, my loins. Like as like this total rock anthem was just amazing. So I'm so happy that I can sort of document my feelings seeing this for the first time, because I really love this.
Oh, the song is absolutely insane because, like you said, it really is supposed to be about the show. But he, starts and goes into this whole thing about, we got rebels making love in the street every day. And then it's like, wait, what? And then he will go to that whole paragraph about, or the whole section about the loins and wanting to press on Scarlett. And he'll eventually take out the bottle of Jack Daniels and start like drinking during the middle of it as he yells, and it's like, yes, you're like, get to it, go. And he keeps going. And then, he sings, Mama, don't you point that gun at me. Or Scarlett says, Mama, don't you point that gun at me. As they go back and forth, we get my blood is concentrated in the blood of the Apache nations. And of course, like, I love this is the point where, a little bit different than what I was saying before about, heading to Andy in that Smorgasbord sketch. I think here there's like some really calculated like drum breaks from Fred and like guitar, from Andy, where it sort of gives us like a little bit of breathing room to then get back to something else insane that's happening here. But I think it's so well done. I believe it is online. I think that the live version that we watched here, and again, we have that up on Patreon, is the version where Jason Sudeikis' microphone is malfunctioning a little bit at the start of it. So they did fix that for the YouTube version. But I would say this is a quintessential, absolute smash of like, this would go on the Best of Will Forte DVD. I think there's 3 Will Forte sketches that are must see from season 31. One is the spelling bee that we saw last time from the Jack Black episode. Number 2 is Duluth Live. Number 3 takes place in the season finale. So we'll talk about that when we eventually get there. But yeah, this for me is like an all-timer, Sammy. And I'm so excited that you never saw it before.
Yeah, Can I get your? I want to ask you something. So with this sketch, it clearly killed. I assume it killed at dress. It's such a strong sketch. It's a long sketch, and you're at this place where you don't have a cold open. Do you ever see a world where this is something like, if you were producing the show at the time, like is this something we could put in the cold open? Just start the show off with this insane, huge energy. Obviously, it's not a political piece, but we're sort of at maybe we're already at the point in the show where we're not really getting non-political cold opens, but it just feels like this is such a strong sketch that I feel like from an energy perspective, it would be a really fun way to open the show. And I think from a production standpoint, what I found to be funny here is this is an incredible performance, and then Death Cab for Cutie has to follow it up, right after. So I think just thinking about the way everything flows, I'd be curious if that is something that would have worked.
Yeah, I think in a different world, like, it makes sense. But in our world, it's tough because then you add a layer of like, why is this happening now? And I'm not saying that every cold open has to be extremely topical, but I think you would have to layer it with something topical for the SNL audience to interpret it in a way. Like if there was something happening in Duluth at the time, then like totally hits on all those levels. This is a Eric Kenward and Will Forte piece. I think as writers, like if Lauren comes to them or Ken Amon comes to them at 10:30 and says like, can we move this to the cold open? Like you have to do a little bit of rewriting of like what can we find in America that's happening right now. Maybe we change the city, but then does that like the name of the city work as well with the song? Like Duluth actually like really flows well with the words. So like I do wonder that. I also think that it requires a lot of cast. So you then have to think about the logistics of like, does the cast then have time to then get into the next thing? I mean, Amy's going to go from, being dressed sort of like Scarlett Johansson in the monologue, like right after being in Duluth Live. So like there's little things that I'm sure that they thought about. So I guess in a production world, like ideally you have such an energetic piece. I love the idea of opening up the show that way. I just don't think it fully makes sense for this show.
Yeah, you're probably right there. The one thing that I do feel like the way this sketch is framed is the fact that it does open up as like a morning talk show. Like I do feel like there's something there where it's like it's almost like you could even make it like the new theme song for like CNN or something, where it's like it's opening up as a political piece and it's actually, and again, that does require some rewriting. But in this sort of week where you might not have a cold open, I'd be curious if that was something, maybe they consider putting something else in there.
Yeah, I also think, sometimes I'll watch this and I'll think a little bit of Wake Up and Smile from the David Alan Grier episode in season 21, which is very famously like a sketch that is a morning talk show that ends up in complete chaos when the teleprompter stops. And that one took place after Update. And I do wonder if like maybe this is a sketch that works really well post Update, because then you sort of have that like excitement and energy, or like, is this an end of the night thing? As far as I'm concerned, this is like a good problem for SNL to have. Like you have something so strong, so great. There's a lot of good places for it. It happens to take place in a pretty unique spot where we're going to go from like this absolute high energy to then musical guest and weekend update. So it may not be the ideal place for it, but regardless, it is an all-time sketch. All right, let's go to the aforementioned Death Cab for Cutie performances. So joining Johansson in making their SNL debut is acclaimed indie rock band Death Cab for Cutie, who will perform tracks from their first major label release plans. The band was recently nominated for a Grammy Award for Best Alternative Album. The band's lush sound has been described as simultaneously intimate and huge by the Onion's AV Club. Death Cab's move to a major label has widely expanded their already ardent fan base, landing the record's debut at number 4 on the Billboard album charts. They're going to perform Soul Meets Body and Crooked Teeth. Sammy, do you have any recollection of listening to Death Cab for Cutie, and what do you think of their performances here?
Yeah, again, like what I said before, really hard to follow up Fly High Duluth here. But no, I mean, Death Cab for Cutie, I feel like I mainly know them from I feel like that's a sticky band name, as something like you hear that name once and it sort of sticks with you. And B, their song that I was maybe thinking they would perform, but they didn't end up performing from this album, I Will Follow You Into the Dark, sort of a slower song, but that was sort of like a campfire classic at our camp. Like I feel like whoever had like sort of the acoustic guitar out and we're singing songs, I feel like that was one that would always hit the campfire. But yeah, these songs was not as familiar with. I found the first performance to be pretty solid, less into the second one, but it sort of makes sense at this time with them on the rise to be booked in this episode.
Yeah, I think I was a little bit young for Death Cab. I think if I was just a few years older, I would have been totally in the right place for a band like this. They're a little like Boys Like Girls-esque, which I really loved a few years later. I really knew Death Cab more because I was such a big fan of the OC, and Seth Cohen's favorite band in the OC was Death Cab, and like would talk about it all the time. So when I think there's like a scene where in one of the seasons, like he has like a new girlfriend and she's like, give me the quintessential Seth Cohen starter pack. And he's like, you got to know all these Death Cab songs. And like, that's how I knew it. It just felt like a little bit for people a few years older, but overall, like listening to these performances, they're very solid. It's nice stuff. It's like better than some of the other musical guests we've seen so far this season, but I don't know that there was anything super notable that I was like wowed by. It was just music that I wasn't listening to in 2006. Okay, let's go to Weekend Update, where we're going to have an interesting Weekend Update. We're going to open up with a video of Lindsey Graham, who's still very much around in modern times, 20 years later. But mostly the start will have to do with Samuel Alito's confirmation for joining the Supreme Court. We're going to see Rachel Dratch in a role that we saw earlier this season of her like jumping into a court hearing, and they're going to place her there. She's going to play Samuel Alito's wife, Martha Ann, reacting or overreacting during the Supreme Court confirmation hearing. Anything you liked here from Dratch on Update?
Yeah, again, I feel this is sort of an interesting thing that they're doing with putting the real clips up against the sort of reactions from Dratch. I thought I would say nothing really stood out for me with it. I liked it. I like that sort of an experimental thing that they're trying here. The one thing that I did write down is you eventually cut the Dratch with like this big bushy beard, and I thought that was pretty funny. But yeah, otherwise it's fine.
Yeah, to me, this is like a whole lot of nothing. Like, I think that any commentary I would have preferred over this. It was cute, and there's nothing against Dratch, but they're giving Dratch like a lot of roles here without lines. And I think as they're headed towards the end of the season and deciding about like what they're going to do moving forward with budget cuts, like I could start to see, even though I love Rachel Dratch, like why maybe she didn't continue on with the show. But yeah, like she does make me laugh in the small things that she does. It's just not exactly what like I would have loved from like a strong Update performance here. Amy and Tina are going to do the Nutbird news quiz, where Tina's going to read some Pat Robertson quotes, and they're going to guess, if this was a Pat Robertson quote or a homeless man, which is Hal Wilner they're showing a picture of. And then we're going to get the actual correspondent on the desk, which is Andy Samberg as himself for Shaggy Hair Corner. He's going to be showing off pictures of him younger with shaggy hair, and then of course other celebrities who are starting to get the shag. So what do you think of Andy at the desk here?
Yeah, this was interesting, just placement in the season wise, because this almost feels like something you get from a featured cast member in like the first couple of run of shows to sort of introduce them to the audience almost. And obviously in the premiere of the season we get the sort of the new guys with Andy and Bill Hader and doing the impressions. So interesting that we're getting this now. Obviously, this is post Lazy Sunday, so it makes sense to get something from Andy on Update here. But yeah, I thought this was cute. It sort of has Andy's sort of brand of silly sort of immature kind of humor playing up on his persona. The one line that I kind of liked, or not liked, but I found was notable, was just the thing with having the long hair and saying,
I'm not in a band and I've never been in a band.
Which I think is ironic because, the Lonely Island, I think I'd consider them a band or a music group. At this point, they're not necessarily established or known as that, but this is post Lazy Sunday. So I just found that to be kind of funny.
Yeah, they didn't hit their musical heights yet, but they had a lot of good things going. And clearly, I don't think they'd do this if it wasn't for the fact that Andy was just taking off at this point. And he was on these talk shows. We talked about last time how he was doing like Letterman and, or Parnell was out there too promoting. And it was just like the hype for Andy was really building at the time. So I think it made sense for the show to just put him out there at the desk as himself. I don't know that he was very comfortable in this role. Like, it's so interesting to watch him as himself talking without like a bit to go on. You're going to see later on where he does like a lot of stuff with Seth that's like super silly or raunchy, and he's so much more comfortable at the desk than he was here. But it's cool to see his progression through the years, and it does make sense why they put him here. Post Update, we're going to get another Colin Jost sketch, which is My Super Sweet 16. This features Scarlett as Crystal, who is talking to her parents, Dratch and Parnell, about planning her Sweet 16. She wants like 1,000 people and alcohol and lasers and doesn't want any nerds there. We're going to see Amy as Sabrina, Crystal's best friend, who is there. And we're going to eventually go to the Sweet 16 with all of the things that she would like and not like. What did you think of our Super Sweet 16 sketch?
Yeah, I thought this had some good moments. I think especially enjoyed the parent characters from Parnell and Dratch, and how Parnell goes on about having to sell his business just to pay for the Sweet 16, and he's going to pay for Hillary and Haley Duff to perform, but he ends up getting the Go-Go's, and Scarlett Johansson freaks out about that. So I think there's a lot of good stuff here. I almost feel like I didn't necessarily watch My Super Sweet 16. I feel like I watched a lot of the ads on MTV or VH1 or whatever, but this almost felt like it wasn't this almost felt like, for the most part, until like the last joke where we get ScarJo saying this party's literally worse than the Holocaust. I feel like everything before that point feels like something you'd actually see in an episode of My Super Sweet 16. So it almost wasn't escalating far enough to me to be like a good parody of it, but they sort of are hitting all the notes of what you'd see in that show. So I think that is sort of put together in a good way. But I almost feel like, besides that last line, which is, insane that they sort of ended on that note, I feel like they almost could have went a little further here.
Yeah, I actually like this a lot more than I think I've read people liked it, because number one, I was actually watching this a lot around then. I thought this was like a show that had just come out, and it was so funny to me to see, like, it was like basically making fun of like very spoiled people. And there's nothing wrong with having a Sweet 16. Like, I have plenty of friends who had Sweet 16s, but just the idea that like these people could not care less about their family and they only want the things that they want. Yes, they could have gone further, but I do think the whole like relationship between Parnell and Scarlett was really funny to me. Everything about her wanting like Haley and Hilary Duff to sing Our Lips Are Sealed, and then instead like they got the Go-Go's.
We actually got the Go-Go's. They're ancient. I'm going to suffocate from their old person smell.
That line you mentioned about this party being worse than the Holocaust was very funny, because I think there was just like it was like a soccer announcer that was recently like got into a lot of trouble for like comparing something to the Holocaust. So it's like whenever that comes, whenever that line comes up, I always do find it amusing in its own way. We also get Kristen, who's going to have her own party at the end. She's going to say like she wanted Shakira to arrest an alligator, and she's like, oh, she won't come.
He's acting like a total immigrant.
Which is really great. So yeah, I think this, like, you're right, it could have gone further, but it verged on, it could have also been like really bad. I think that's the thing, is like these are types of sketches that could have been like really campy and really bad, but I think it played on the right angle. Something really interesting for me here is that Tiana Taylor, who's hosting Saturday Night Live next week, do you know, like very famously, like became known for her having a Super Sweet 16 on the show?
I didn't know that until I saw that pop up on Twitter this week. So yeah, pretty crazy sort of 20 years later connection here. It might be the first person who was on My Super Sweet 16 to host SNL.
Yeah, maybe. I'm trying to take a look at some other celebrity.
I don't know any other notable people who are on that show.
Yeah, Chris Brown, musical guest. Bow Wow, I don't think was ever on SNL. Soulja Boy, no. Yeah, no. I think Tiana Taylor, maybe first host from My Super Sweet 16.
Host. Yeah. All right, here we go. Very nice.
Yeah. I also I love. There's just a line that hit me really hard, because I remember hearing this for the first time. As Scarlett said, I can text vote on American Idol without permission, which for me was so funny, because I was such a big American Idol person at the time, and the idea that the 16-year-old can influence someone's career to the extent that they were was great. So good stuff here. Love everything from her being like, gosh, Dad, you're stressing me out. Can you just pay for everything and leave? Okay, let's get into a Jason Sudeikis sketch, which is the once-in-a-lifetime jeweler's Ed Mahoney character, where he walks into a jewelry store. Very different character here from Scarlett, as she's playing the worker at the store. And he's there. He wants to buy an engagement ring for his girlfriend, and he's like very eccentric and has all these questions. And Finesse is there as a security guard, making sure he doesn't steal anything. And he's going to eventually find out how much it's going to cost. It's going to cost like almost $6,000, and he tries to take the rings and run and get stopped there. But this is like the over exuberant, excited Ed Mahoney character that we're seeing for the first time from Sudeikis.
Yeah, I thought this was great. I think the Sudeikis character, the Ed Mahoney character, I think it's just so well sort of characterized. It's like very unique. It's not just like a weirdo or an asshole. There's just like an amalgamation of layers to this guy that makes him such a nuisance to have to deal with. And there's just a lot of great lines here, like him saying, I'd be lying if that wasn't, or no, there's the line about I need a ring that, is not
So big that I gotta work Saturdays and not so small that she'll kick me in the nuts.
him saying, I'd be lying if that wasn't part of the reason I'm here. Like, I thought that was super funny. And he's just so insufferable. And I think he just plays it so well. I think the straight woman performance from ScarJo is great. And then eventually when he finds out how much of the ring is going to cost, he's like, oh, sorry, I wasted your time. And then just the way they're looking at each other. And while I'm watching the sketch, I'm like, oh, this is kind of weird. And then he goes and he grabs all the rings and bolts out. Finesse tases him again. I just thought the physical performance there was great. So yeah, just as a two-hander, I thought this was really good.
And when he was tasing him, I couldn't help but think of the American Taser commercial we saw earlier in the season with the entire cast tasing each other. But yeah, I've always liked this character from Sudeikis because it definitely feels way different than most of the character he's going to play throughout his time at the show. This is the most I'm going to say most Dan Aykroyd character in a way, because you normally think of Dan Aykroyd as the straight pitchman type of thing. But I feel like Danny had these eccentric characters at times that he would play, thinking about Fred Garvin, where he had this extra wide personality to him. I'm trying to take my brain thoughts and communicate them in that way, but there's just something about them that I felt there's a connection between Jason and Danny here that I saw a lot in a different way than we would normally see Jason connected to Danny. But I think some of the lines here are really great. He mentions Kansas City at one point, so that Sudeikis had a large part in writing this one. I also enjoyed when he talks about how, Scarlett's character is single in the sketch, and he's like, it's a weird move having a single woman selling engagement rings. It's like having a chubby woman at the front desk of a gym. And she's like, is it? So yeah, that was very good. He gets into the whole bit about this being is this really just a front for heroin? But yeah, I like it. He's going to really not do this very much on the show. There's one other sketch we're going to get in a couple of years where we're going to see this character again. I'm surprised. I would love to ask him one day if he wanted to do this more than he actually got on the show, because it is a very different type of piece than what we normally get from Jason.
Yeah, and it feels like you can sort of plug him into a lot of different scenarios and find different ways to sort of mine how sort of, just how much of a nuisance he can be. So I think there was a lot more we could have seen from this character.
Let's head to a submarine where we're going to see Scarlett, Seth, and Horatio, who was absent from the last episode, but we do have him back in this one. We saw him in Fly High Duth a little bit, but he is here alongside Seth and Scarlett, and it's really a Seth-centric piece where he is Jeff. He's with his wife, Kendra. They are there in a submarine, and we find out that Scarlett, Kendra, had a affair with Kevin, who's Horatio's character, in the submarine, and this whole thing of how is this possible? We're right next to each other. How did you guys have time to have an affair? And how did you reach over? We could barely move. We're going to see Andy pop up, Drake the intern, that Seth didn't even know was there. And it's going to end on a newspaper saying 4 people missing in a submarine assumed drowned. So this is the other Seth piece that we get in this episode. What did you think of it?
Yeah, I thought the way this sketch is sort of blocked, or the setup of it, with them just all being so tight together in the quarters of the submarine and just the camera right in front of them, I thought that was just very interesting. I can't really remember sort of a sketch, sort of using the space like that. So I thought that was interesting to see. For me with this sketch, I found that this as a concept is great. I like this concept a lot. I almost feel like, I don't know if it's a casting thing or whatever, but something about the energy here between everybody. I don't know. I almost didn't feel sort of the connection or just the anger. I think Seth is doing an okay job. I kind of like how it goes from him being mad about the situation with her cheating on him, and more so him trying to understand the logic about how that even happened. Once we get into the sort of runner of her saying, we played charades and we danced and we did all these things. I think all that is funny, but I don't know. There's something about, and maybe it's just the fact that you're in this tight space that's hard to sort of do, maybe play those emotions to the full extent that I feel like would have made this sort of just I guess better. But and then again, you're throwing Andy in here, so I thought him just coming out of nowhere as the intern was funny.
Oh, hey guys, what's up?
But yeah, there's something about it that didn't fully come together, but I'm glad they sort of tried this.
I'm completely on the same page as you. There's two things that I really think that they could have done here that I would have pivoted. One, I think Horatio is miscast. It's not that it's like not believable in a sketch form that Scarlett and Horatio could like get together, but I do think you need somebody who's there, who's really showing up Seth, who's there to like be like this like very suave person that's more believable in the sketch, like actually on paper, that they would have gotten together behind Seth's back, so that there's like added frustration there. And I think it's more like in a jokey way of like how did you guys hook up with each other? So I think that's one direction they could have gone in if they really wanted to lean into it more. And then the second is like when Andy comes out, I thought that he would come there and it's like, oh, okay, this is kind of crazy. And then like another person would pop out and then maybe another person. And like, yes, it's very tight quarters. It's hard. Like at a certain point, like where does it become safe? Where does it become not claustrophobic? But I think the idea here that there's just all of these extra people who are there in the submarine that he didn't know about, to the point where it becomes like, if you're going to lean into the lack of realism in a sketch, I think you got to lean into all the way. I think there was the sketch that I really would have enjoyed, because then we could like physically see how stupid it is that they're there. There's almost like a, like I think of like sometimes like a what up with that quality of like, where did all these people come from? Like, I think that like that is the sketch that I was looking for from this one that didn't fully hit for me.
Yeah, I completely agree. You almost lean into the fact that they're underwater more, have like a merman, show up or something, like just something to sort of heighten it. But I feel like we get some of that with just what they did in the submarine, but we don't get to see it. So we're just kind of, it's not as funny hearing it as sort of seeing sort of how that'll play out.
Our final sketch of the night is a Tina Fey sketch where we're going to have a commercial for a lost Jane Austen work, which is sort of this like Bridgerton-esque thing where we're going to have these three women who are together. We got Tina, who is actually appearing in this sketch alongside Rachel Dratch and Scarlett Johansson, where they are very excited for Mr. Willoughby to show up and woo them away and get married to Mr. Willoughby. And they talk about the tale of Mr. Willoughby, who we don't actually get to see in a sketch, but they just describe in many weird, ridiculous ways. Like he has these like malformities on his face and things like that as they dive into Mr. Willoughby. What did you think of our final sketch of the night?
Yeah, I found this is a sketch that I don't think I necessarily laughed a ton during, but I found it very amusing. Like I found this as a concept of sort of parodying sort of the Jane Austen style movies, the sort of thing you maybe see around the Oscar season of a British period piece, but then having it sort of all be centered around this man. It's almost like a Bill Brasky type of thing, where you're sort of describing what this character is, but in this scenario, it's a bunch of drinking buddies. It's these female suitors.
I feel like Victorian ladies.
Yeah, Victorian ladies, exactly. So I like that sort of juxtaposition. But yeah, I think from a writing perspective, there's a lot of funny lines here. But I don't think I necessarily was, I guess, laughing out loud. But I found sort of the description, the way it's sort of getting sort of grosser and grosser about sort of what this guy is, and they're still sort of like infatuated with him, is a funny concept. So very silly, not hilarious, but I found the performances from everybody to be, solid, and I think the writing is good here. Just it's sort of, I don't know, it's just something that's maybe funnier on paper.
I think so too. I definitely think there's Brasky elements to this sketch, but missing a few very important things that I think would elevate something like this, because it's almost like reverse Brasky, where they're talking up their coworker or their colleague Bill Brasky, but here they want to marry this guy, but they're talking about all the things that are wrong with him, yet they still want him. So it's like there is like a different dynamic to it. But I think with Brasky, there's the interjections by one of the drunk salesmen who just yells something like ridiculous, oftentimes Will Ferrell, and you're like, wait, what did you just say? And like, we're just going to ignore it and keep going. So I think there's that. And I also think that like the fact that in the Brasky sketches, there is taking place at a bar, and it's believable that these like people are telling these tales, and the drunk, they're like being drunk and gross, and all the other people in the bar are bothered by them. I think it adds like an important layer to this, where the fact that all three of these women are sort of in love with Mr. Willoughby, but there's no one there to like have a dissenting opinion. Like there's no other person that's sitting in the corner of the room that's like, hey, maybe Mr. Willoughby isn't such a good person for you to marry. I think it was missing that. And that was my problem with it.
Yeah, and I almost feel like with where we're at in the season, where we don't have a ton of women in the cast. Maya Rudolph is still not here. Like and we get Tina in the sketch, who we don't always see in the sketch. I would have just found a way to get Amy and Kristen in here, and I feel like whether they're in that sort of dissenting role or something, and I know it's sort of being played as more of a movie trailer, so maybe you can't have it go into all these different areas, but I feel like almost with a movie trailer, you can show different parts of the movie. So I feel like that could have maybe added a little bit more to this. But again, I think some of the actual lines about the Mr. Willoughby character I found to be amusing.
When he speaks, the air is filled with the smell of roasted meats.
But it didn't even have to be a movie trailer. Like it was framed that way, but it could have just been opening up on, going back to these women who were fawning over this Mr. Willoughby. So I like the concept. I just didn't love the execution for this one. Yeah. So, but overall, like it was a fun night of the show. I think Scarlett was fantastic. And I think there was obviously some really high highs. And I wouldn't say there were too many low lows. I just think that there were sketches that didn't fully come together. So I'm feeling pretty good about the show.
Yeah, no, definitely coming off of a pretty solid run between Baldwin and the Jack Black episode and this. I think you're feeling good if you're in 2006, being an SNL fan.
So let's talk MVP. So if you have been not watching all season long, we're going to spoil the MVP results from the first 9 episodes that we've been going through, and Sammy's been picking his MVP. He's been consulting me or any of our guests to ask them about what we think for MVP, but ultimately Sammy has the final say. So I'm going to put up on screen who we have so far, and through season 31, episode 9, we got 2 MVPs for Bill Hader, 2 for Daryl Hammond, who was not in the episode, 1 for Amy, 1 for Jason, 1 for Parnell, 1 for Kristen Wiig, and 1 for Andy Samberg. So Sammy, what are you thinking for season 31, episode 10?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like a number of appearances, I'm watching the episode. I'm like, Amy's getting a lot on here. Chris Parnell is somebody who comes in with some bit roles that I like. But what I find interesting about this episode is, for me, it's no question that the person who I think only appears in one sketch, Will Forte, is like a slam dunk pick here for the MVP. I found that sketch was maybe my favorite of the season so far. Potentially, I mean, definitely favorite live sketch. Obviously, Lazy Sunday as a pre-tape, might be my favorite sketch overall. But I found that, and it's totally in his humor. So even though we're not seeing him all over the show, we're not seeing the George Bush impression as we've seen throughout the season. He's getting something on that it has a sort of lasting impact, at least for me as somebody who's watched, many SNL episodes. This is a sketch that I feel like is going to be, sticking with me for a long time.
Yeah, I feel you. I mean, I have trouble giving MVP to someone who appears once in an episode. Like, you have to just really put something over the top. And I think that Forte does that here. So I'm kind of okay with it. Obviously, how big of a fan I am. So I'm excited to give him the MVP whenever we can. But the other contender is certainly Amy, who was all over the episode and really did elevate some pieces just by like her performances, but she doesn't carry something in the way that Forte does. And I think that, you pull Amy out of this episode, I think a bunch of sketches probably get a little bit worse. But overall, like you take Forte out of this episode, and we don't get Fly High Duluth. And I think we're looking at this as like a very mediocre episode, but Forte actually makes this with that sketch. And it isn't just one sketch. It's a one sketch that has a huge chunk of the episode. It's a long sketch. So for me, like the impact of that 1 7-minute segment is much higher than your average like 3 or 4 minute sketch. And in that case, I do feel like totally well deserved for Will Forte to put this episode over the top.
Yeah, no, I mean, and again, with an episode where we don't really have a cold open, really, and we have a TV Funhouse, like, there's not. I mean, I'm not saying there's not a ton. There's obviously a ton of different sketches that we liked in this episode, but I do really feel like this is sort of like the linchpin that without Forte, we wouldn't necessarily be looking at this episode necessarily as fondly. I think we'd still highlight how ScarJo was a great first time host. But yeah, I think we got to give it the Forte here.
All right, there you go. Will Forte, MVP of episode 10. So 6 sketches in this episode for Dratch, Parnell, and Polar, 5 for Andy Samberg. So again, somebody who, they're clearly wanting to use a little bit more. I'll talk about him in a second with what was cut from the night. Jason Sudeikis in 4 sketches. We got 3 for Bill Hader and Kristen Wiig, 2 for Fred, Tina, Seth, Finesse, Horatio, and Keenan, 1 for Forte, and nothing from Daryl. And of course, Maya Rudolph not back at the show yet. But, this is another episode that I really feel like they're continuing to move into this, new era of the show. They are using the new players more. We get to see a lot of Andy and Jason and Bill and Kristen, like, they are focusing on having them in the show. So I do feel very excited for what's to come. For what was cut from the night, so I told you about the hardball cold open. There was also a Tonight Show sketch that was cut where I assume that Daryl was going to play Leno. I know he was in that sketch, so he was cut from that one. So again, 2 Daryl pieces that we didn't get to see. There was a bar sketch that focused on Seth, so he did get a couple pieces in the show, so it made sense that they cut that one. There was a limo ride sketch that focused on Finesse Mitchell that got cut from the show. I believe that there was in a previous season, I don't know if you remember, Sammy, that had Finesse as a limo driver. I couldn't remember which sketch it was exactly, but I think that was a highlight piece for him a couple years ago that he did. And yeah, I don't know if you remember, but then there was another Will Forte sketch also called False Date that did not make this episode. And then the final piece that was cut that aired at Dress was a digital short called The Tangent. And that was a sketch that was more in vein of what we saw with, sketches that take place on the stoop at their apartments. This was a Fred Armisen focused digital short that they filmed for this week that got cut that we will see eventually in a couple of weeks. So we'll talk about it when we get there, but that did not air in this episode. I also wanted to talk about when this episode re-aired. So it re-aired once on NBC in April 1st, 2006, and ultimately came in 8th place in the ratings, 8th out of 20th for this episode. So those are the stats from season 31. Episode 10. Coming up next week on our look back at season 31, 20 years later, we're going to be talking about Peter Sarsgaard hosting Saturday Night Live with music from The Strokes, who are the musical guest for the second time here at the show. So are you excited for Peter Sarsgaard hosting?
Yeah, Peter Sarsgaard is, I guess you can call him a character actor. At this point in his career, he's in Garden State is a big movie for him, and he still pops up in a ton of stuff. He was in the Batman a couple of years ago, so yeah, I'm excited to check that episode out. He seems like the type of sort of character actor that would really excel at SNL. And then The Strokes, it's funny. The Strokes is a band that I've just in the last year sort of gotten into. I've obviously heard a ton of their music over the years, but yeah, I'm excited to sort of go back and check out this performance from them, sort of, not their height necessarily, but when they're really starting to come on the scene.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. And there's a very famous malfunction in one of the sketches next week that we'll talk about a lot when we go over that. So if you want to see that episode and all of our episodes of season 31, 20 years later, please subscribe to the podcast on Patreon by going to patreon.com/the SNL Network, or you can join us in our YouTube podcast tier by registering there as becoming a member of our channel. Of course, in real time, we will be back this week with full coverage of the upcoming episode with Stranger Things Finn Wolfhard and music from A$AP Rocky. So that should be a lot of fun. And to find all of our coverage that we have here on the SNN, you can subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and follow us on all social platforms at the SNL Network. Sammy, thanks for joining us here.
John, thanks as always for having me. It's always fun to look back at these episodes. So definitely, if you guys out there, subscribe to the Patreon if you haven't already to catch up. And then you guys can find me at @SammyK on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Letterboxd. It's Oscar season, so posting some reviews, so definitely check those out. And I believe I'll be on the Hot Take show for the Tiana Taylor episode, so I'm excited for that because One Battle After Another was definitely my favorite movie of that year. So you know, I'm going to pull a TJ here and say, I recommend you watch one battle after another. Go ahead and do that.
And I heard that her Sweet 16 was your favorite Super Sweet 16.
Yep. You heard it here first.
Sounds good. Well, thanks everybody for checking this one out, and I hope you enjoyed it. For everyone getting to go behind the paywall and watching this one, I can't wait to read the comments, both in the live chat and after the fact on the YouTube video. So on behalf of Sammy K, my name is John Schneider from the SNN, and we will see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.
It's on the Saturday Night Network.